One of the things that we say is birds tell us. They're telling us what's happening to the world around us. And it's time for us to listen.
All the trend data show we're going in the wrong direction with songbirds, with forest birds, with prairie birds.
Bird losses are at an incredible high right now. The last 50 years, we've lost about 3 billion birds from North America only.
We have to pay attention to it. We have to understand what's happening so that we can make the adjustments in our society, in our cities, in our homes, so that we can reverse those trends.
This is a bird that has struck glass.
Oh man.
Looks like a Lincoln sparrow.
Every year, hundreds of millions of birds are estimated to die in building collisions. And one of the factors involved in building collisions is light pollution. About 80% of North American migratory birds make their journey at night. So by impacting light pollution, reducing the amount of it, we can do our part to help reduce building collisions overall and protect these birds.
We're living in a sort of a data age, and it's a very exciting time as a researcher to have so much information on birds. We have at least the potential to act, and that can be very simple. Just turn out your light and make sure there are not so many lighted structures in our cities on these major migration nights.
We know light pollution is a problem for birds.
This is a spectacular rose-breasted grosbeak.
And with this research, we saw that illuminated windows, that is where all the birds are striking practically. And the dark windows are mostly ignored by the birds.
To think that a building that we put up has taken the life of a bird that flew all the way to Peru last winter and won't be breeding this summer.
We know Texas is incredibly important for birds. We know where they are and when they're passing. And with that information, armed with that, we can have an incredibly powerful impact if we then tell people, oh, here's a very simple action that you can do, turning lights out. And here's the time and place to do it.
A truly spectacular natural phenomenon that happens here on the Texas coast is spring migration and the arrival of spring migrants. We're on the Bolivar Peninsula. It's functionally a barrier island, and that means it's great prairie habitat, tons of wetlands, and flat, very flat.
Bird migration in Texas it's just globally amazing. So every year there are billions of birds migrating across the Americas every spring, and most of this movement happens at night. Big data sets tell us a diversity of species are migrating from the places where they've spent the winter in tropical South America, in Mexico, maybe parts of the Caribbean depending, to the areas that they're going to breed. So the boreal forests of Canada, the prairie wetlands, even other spots within the US, in some cases the eastern deciduous forests or areas of the Intermountain West. All of these places connect through Texas. 1 out of every 3 birds that's migrating in the US every year passes through Texas. Just enormous numbers of birds.
All these migratory birds that took off from Mexico yesterday, they've flown all night and today, and this is landfall. And so they're flying in low, or they're looking out across, and what do they see? High Island. A big patch of habitat that will help them get the water and the food and the rest that they need. These birds are arriving and they are depleted. They're looking to put some insects, some food, some berries, some seeds, whatever it is that they specialize on, they are looking for that and they know what to look for. Two days later, might be 3 days later, they get ready when the conditions are right again, and they make that next big jump. And that's usually when we see a lot of birds coming out over our cities. And they're so high up that you're missing it. You can't hear it because they're a mile up in the air. But this is a huge wave that are passing through right over our homes as we sleep.
Migratory species have evolved over thousands of years to navigate in low light conditions. And that's because they use stars and celestial bodies to orient themselves so that they're going in the right direction on these long migratory journeys. Light pollution affects birds in a couple of ways. First, it reduces the visibility of the night sky, so birds can't see those stars that they use to navigate. Also, light pollution disorients birds because birds evolved in an environment where we didn't have bright lights in cities. So when a bird is flying at night and it's navigating by the stars, it's doing so in low light conditions, and when it comes upon an urban environment like a large city, those bright lights all of a sudden make it so that the bird can't see those stars anymore.
So it's confusing. Here's this giant glow. I'm attracted to it, just like a moth might be attracted to a campfire, or a June bug is attracted to a street light. They are attracted to the light because it's part of their instinctual drive. And that's what we're trying to understand.
So we know Texas is enormously important for migrating birds. And one of the challenges is that human footprint of where people are in Texas connect to where light pollution is. And places like Houston and Dallas are ranked 2 and 3 out of the 125 largest cities in the US for exposing birds to light pollution at night. So not only is Texas enormously important It also can be potentially very dangerous for migrating birds. There are a lot of structures that come up into the atmosphere, buildings, communications towers, even residential homes in some cases. And that when birds are passing at night, these structures are illuminated. There is light associated with them. And there's been a lot of effort put into trying to understand, well, what is the mortality here? How many birds are we losing? And in the US, the best research so far suggests that it's several hundred million to 1 billion birds every year in collisions with structures. Now, not all of these are migrants, but that's a huge number of birds.
I guess we'll all have to go through that access point anyway.
So it's a 10 building survey route, about 7 miles total, and we'll be checking this one out. It's the first one. Yeah, so we found about 130 bird casualties so far in downtown Dallas, and it's evidence that we're having collision issues here during spring migration. And we just want to try to do everything we can to limit those casualties and to help as many buildings go lights out as possible and save birds. Sunrise down here is beautiful. It is.
You can see all the planted areas here, and then you've got curving glass all around the building. We hope that we come out and we're successful in not finding anything. That's the goal that we want to have. But if we do find, if something does die, we hope that we find it so it's getting used for some sort of research purposes. This is a bird that has struck glass off of a skywalk, and what we'll do is we'll put it in a bag, put it with a tag, add it into iNaturalist, which is going to document it, and then each number that goes with the bird will stay on a spreadsheet.
Oh, baby.
Looks like a Lincoln sparrow. Goes off. Look how beautiful the gray is on the head.
Those lovely red stripes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The birds are flying at night, and the lights in an area like these metropolitan areas are so bright that they attract them down out of the sky. They come down into the city. Sometimes they may hit buildings as they're coming down, or they may just hang out here in the city. And then you have plantings around buildings that are ideal little oases for these animals to hang out. And then maybe something startles them up, maybe they see a reflection in the glass. Basically, something causes them to strike the glass of buildings and skywalks and sometimes railings that are made out of glass.
To me, it seems like a no-brainer. You know, simple action to do so much good. But it's just a matter of getting the word out, awareness. And then also the matter of, you know, behavior change, where we've done it one way for so long, and then how do we make a change? Yeah. You know, how do we, what breaks that inertia? That's the key.
For sure.
If we find injured birds, we take them to a local bird rehabber.
That was the one from earlier, from here.
And if they're dead, then we tag them with data that will go to A&M, and there's a series, I think 7 or 8 different scientists that are doing research projects on the birds.
We take 3 pictures, ventral, dorsal, lateral.
So we know that these enormous numbers of birds are colliding and dying in these collisions with structures. Not all structures are created equal. It's not like every building, every house is necessarily killing birds. We know that there are very specific ones in some cases that may contribute tremendously. For example, a particular building in Chicago that's been studied very well, McCormick Place, a diversity of species, all killed at this building, galvanized people to say, look, turning out lights is a simple solution that could mitigate this hazard.
Chicago is definitely a center of bird migration. And because of the lakefront that concentrates birds that are somewhat averse to being out over the water, numbers can be gigantic after a given night of migration. Light is an issue with birds, is something that had been talked about for many, many years, but there were almost no studies that you could say to a building manager, look, this is when lights are on, this is when lights are off. It was more just what people felt. Now the data actually showed that it was important. The building, it's imposing in terms of its footprint, but it's not particularly imposing in terms of its height. A lot of times with birds hitting buildings, everyone assumes it's skyscrapers, but that isn't necessarily the case. McCormick Place, I would estimate at about 3 stories at best, with a major overhang. It's right along the lakefront. And on nights when there's a show in there or when a show is being moved in or out, it is just alive with lights. The internal lights along the ceiling. That seems to be the nights, if there are birds around, birds are hitting. When lots and lots of birds are migrating, this stretch we're in right now is often one of the ones with the most casualties. So here is one. It's a Nashville warbler. They winter in Central America, and then the North Woods is where they spend the summers. So it's already made one round trip to Mexico, at least.
We know light pollution is a problem for birds and has some link to bird collisions.
So this is northern water thrush and another Nashville warbler and a spectacular rose-breasted grosbeak.
But light is likely not the only factor. We have to think about clouds, the winds, maybe how bright the moon is, in addition to lighting and potentially other factors.
So this is a northern flicker.
And what is remarkable about this location and its scientific context is that researchers at the Field Museum, led by Dave Willard, have monitored this building for bird collisions, walking around the perimeter essentially every day during the migration season for something like 40 years.
And this is a gray catbird.
And in that process, they have collected a huge amount of information. And this data set of lighting plus bird collisions is, to my knowledge, unique in the world in its specificity of which lights were on and where did birds collide. And so that gives us the ability to link bird collisions to lighting in a way that is not really possible anywhere else. With this research, we saw 2 main findings. One, that when we look at McCormick Place over the years when the lights were on and when the lights were off, the number of birds colliding with illuminated window bays is many times higher than the number of birds that collide with dark window bays. So we can just see right at the outset that illuminated windows, that is where all the birds are striking practically, and the dark windows are mostly ignored by the birds. But you may wonder, if I darken this side of the building, are those birds that would have collided with that side just going to be attracted to another part of the building and still end up colliding? Am I really making a difference by darkening a particular window bay? And what our study suggests is that darkening an individual window bay isn't simply sending those birds to collide somewhere else, that it's actually additively decreasing the number of birds that collide with the building. So that gives us a hopeful message, which is that turning off lights at individual windows is likely to make a meaningful difference in reducing bird mortality.
McCormick Place participates in Lights Out Chicago. Our policy is to turn the lights out when the buildings aren't occupied as much as possible, and to have security walk around at night and make sure that the lights are off. And also decades ago, we contributed to the construction of the bird sanctuary that's directly south of McCormick Place. So that it's created a habitat that's essentially an alternative for the migrating bird population. I think as a design professional, knowledge and data is always important in forming a new building design or even the renovation of a building. McCormick Place Lakeside Center is due for a renovation. We would look into the latest materials and systems. The glass, I think we would research. It's the original single pane glass from 1971. It definitely would be advantageous to do a much more high-tech glass, insulated glass with a frit in it, which is considered bird-friendly glass. The main point with sustainability is at the end of the day, it's just a practical solution. And it isn't necessarily onerous from a cost standpoint because long-term you are going to save money. So, win-win.
So there's a very direct connection to you turning off your lights, to allowing birds to continue on their way, to protecting them. And it's critically important to provide the tools to understand not only what the science is, but when to act. If we could create a forecast model for birds, we can predict when these movements are going to occur and act on that as far in advance as we can. But this enormous movement of birds that's occurring at night is not something that's very easy necessarily to study directly. So we're left with less direct approaches to do it, what we call remote sensing. In the US, we have this unique network of weather surveillance radars that's distributed around the country, 143 of them. And we use radar to detect these two different phenomena, meteorology and biology, using the same network that covers the entirety of the continent.
The radar is one of the few techniques, or maybe the only technique, where you can actually have this night vision at enormous altitudes and enormous distances. So it's not just a weather surveillance radar, it's also a wildlife surveillance radar. So what you're seeing here is this map of the United States. Each of these little dots are radar stations all across the US. So now we're zooming in a little into the area of one radar. This is the radar near Dallas. And this is what a strong migration night looks like. But notice this boom, this very abrupt increase in the signal that we're measuring. The birds migrate at night mostly, and that's why we see this sudden appearance of all these birds in the air. And we're starting again. Now it's sunset, boom, all these birds are appearing in the air. So that's very typical signal for migratory birds, this abrupt departure at sunset. Ultimately, what we also want to do is sort of predict when these mass movements happen, because if you can predict it, then you can act and turn out your lights at night. And the way that we do that is we can train a computer to see what type of weather is now associated with a lot of bird migration. So we have the weather model and we have the observations by the radars, and we just feed that into the computer, and then the computer by itself figures out which type of weather is really associated with strong migration. And once the computer has learned that, then we let the computer predict how much migration will be associated with that. And in that way we can make a forecast. And it works amazingly well.
So taking these models that use weather data and relate that to bird migration intensity and allow us to forecast 3 days in advance. And we provide migration alerts. That kind of messaging where, yes, we have a broad approach where less light pollution is better across the board, but there are targeted instances where you can reduce the impacts. That's very powerful. And we've seen interest swell. Since the fall of 2020, we've seen some incredible response.
The Lights Out Texas project now involves dozens of organizations supporting across the state. People are willing to be part of the Lights Out initiative. A lot of it is just awareness, letting them know what the problem is and how they can help. We have Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Galveston, Cedar Hill, Austin, Dripping Springs, all having made some sort of proclamation or resolution or partnership with the Downtown Alliance to get lights off. That's something that I'm very proud of.
You know, I think the most exciting part of this project is that we're able to do something that helps nature. And it's so easy. It's like, why wouldn't we do that? I think we all have a responsibility to bird conservation.
When we turn out the lights at night, that also allows us to save energy. Reducing energy consumption reduces air pollutants, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It also results in cost savings. And that can mean a lot for a homeowner. It can also mean a lot for building owners who are looking to save money. It really is a win-win solution for both people and birds.
You know, light pollution is something that needs to get better, and it's going to take all of us to make it better. You know, what's the worst that could happen? We save some energy, we see some stars, you know, that's great. And the big benefit is we can help understand this particular collision problem and come up with solutions together.
So one of the things we've learned about from our research in Texas about migration is that half of that movement happens in a very short period of time. So if you want to know, well, what can I do? When should I participate and what kinds of lights should I turn off? Come talk to us. We can tell you. We can tell you when birds are migrating. We can tell you how many. We can even tell you a number of birds that are passing on a given night and what we're forecasting will come. The action is very simple. Turn out your lights tonight. These things all add up to a great potential to save birds.
Disturbing story here. Hundreds of birds are dead after slamming into McCormick Place. It happened overnight. The Tribune reporting nearly 1,000 birds died after colliding with that building.
Thousands of migrating birds have died in Chicago over the last few days. It's being called a massive carnage by those who study the animals.
An unusual situation at McCormick Place today. Nearly 1,000 birds found dead.
Experts say they were migrating south, and our big city buildings with lots of windows confused their migration patterns.
The birds are being preserved at the Field Museum. They were part of a massive migration south when it's believed bright lights and low clouds caused the birds to get confused and hit McCormick Place.
So what I'm spreading out here are the birds that that ran into McCormick Place last Thursday night, October 4th to 5th. On a typical night at McCormick Place, we would find anywhere from 0 to 15 birds. Rarely does it go into the 20s and 30s or above, and far rarer is 100 to 200. The most common bird was palm warbler, and to have 300 of one species in one night, totally unprecedented. Over here are the bags of yellow-rumped warblers, which were the next most common at 212. It's in numbers that just are mind-boggling. McCormick Place does have a curtain that can be drawn, and we do think that were the curtain to be drawn, that it would prevent a large percentage of the collisions. It wouldn't bring things to zero, and it would not necessarily be a generalizable solution for all the buildings around Chicago that are also killing birds. But McCormick Place's big pathology is lots of glass with lights on that birds can see. And it would be preventable to a great degree were the curtains to have been drawn.